universe as it is the potential of the technology. And there's a lot of work to be done before it gets anywhere near the hyped up potential that we see breathlessly expressed in the press.
All right, Pierce.
Yeah, I mean, I voted for change as well. I think definitely the hype has been a bit crazy, especially kind of like in Q1 and Q2 of this year. But it's you know, I've kind of turned the corner on it. I mean, I think it's a platform shift. I think it's going to be something that's eventually going to have an impact like other platform shifts we've seen, like cloud or PC or mobile. Like I think it's not going to be something that happens this year. But I think it's going to change the way we interact with our technology in a significant way.
All right. Marcelo, close this out.
Okay, hello. I chose change as well. I do think there's a bit of hype in there, and probably because it got a lot of national news, which is very rare for a technology that we use in our industries. And so it's a bit blown out of proportion. But I vote for change because I see a lot of potential with the current AI technologies, particularly around automation. We're doing some research projects in our office now to kind of exploit the automation part of the AI technology.
All right. Sorry, I'm setting up the next poll here. Thank you guys for that as an opening statement. Next question for our audience here. Is a building generated by today's tools a building? Kind of feel like I know already what people are going to say.
I think the way we phrase that is a bit tautological there, Andre.
Well, is it or no? Well, or not?
Yeah, I mean, I think the question is whatever that comes out of an image generator a building?
Yeah, that
put?
would have been the smarter way to phrase it. The copy pasting here, I was listening to you rather than think ahead on the copy paste and do this with the brain, so I did it with a half a brain. So still getting some answers. Put our chat, giving us the numbers. All right, so just over 3/4 are saying no, it's not a building.
So what is?
So what is it? That's the question for you, starting with Marcelo. What's your take on this?
Okay, you're starting with me. I said no building, but I take a more mathematical engineering approach on it because I'm in the structural design subdiscipline. So if I see an image generated from a image generator, text to image, I wonder where's the math, the logic, the science behind it. And so it's very superficial to me. I think there's a place for it, probably early on in design, but nothing that could be concrete to work on. Well, literally, figuratively, concrete to work on. So as far as I'm concerned, it is not a building.
All right, Pierce.
All right. I picked a building, but I kind of have two answers for it. My background is I went to school for architecture, worked in architecture, and then I became a contractor for like 10 years before I'm doing the things that I do now. So the architect answer is it kind of is a building. Back in the school days, I mean, the rendering used to be a lot of work to get to. I remember the years before V-Ray and creating renderings was a very specialized skill. So the image was the center of your pinup. It was the cover of your portfolio. It was the concept that you showed the client. You won competitions with that image. It's the cover of Architectural Record. And once again, it used to have a really high value before it became something that you could do just by typing 3 sentences into Midjourney. The contractor answer is no, it's not a building. It never was. I was amazed as an architect coming into construction that the GCs don't even look at the renderings because they're not to scale. They're just marketing for the architect. Even if they, if you wanted useful renderings, it's an additional service you have to pay for. So the contractor attitude is like, no, show me construction documents until Midjourney can make 100% CDs. It doesn't matter to me.
Okay, Pierce. Now I'm really depressed speaking as both an architect and your former teacher. You've crossed over to the dark side where you think architects think that images of buildings are buildings. And I want to just comment on your reference about Architectural Record, because early in my career, the editor of Architectural Record said to the principal of a firm I was working for, we don't publish buildings. We publish pictures of buildings, and your pictures of your buildings are lousy. And even the publisher of record or the editor of record was making a distinction between an image of a building and a building. That was and I confess that was the pre-digital age.
All right, so Phil, you're clearly on the side of it's not a building, it's just an image.
Well, I think, if these systems purport to reason about things, then they have to reason about something more than a layer of pixels. And what they're doing is producing correlations of pixel relationships that result in two-dimensional images that human brains interpret as buildings. But that does not make those things a building. I mean, if we asked Marcelo to do something with one of those images, he couldn't do anything with them. And if we asked the bot, what is the structural frame behind that building, you're going to get some kind of hallucinogenic bullshit. So those things are image generators. They're not buildings. They're vague notions of images of buildings. I mean, that's what I think.
All right,
Phil, sorry, I just want to do a follow-up with Phil. I mean, so Phil, just in terms of kind of like where the image exists, lives in the value chain. I feel like it used to be the rendering came last after you'd kind of done all the hard work, and now the rendering can come first. Does that, does that kind of put a different spin on it for you?
Come first before you do what? Promise your client that you can figure everything else out after you generate the image?
I guess so, yeah. I mean,
dear God.
Concept design used to be a thing that took, used to have this kind of big effort that went into it. Now suddenly you can just be like, give me the Zaha Hadid cultural center and give me 20 of them.
Well, interesting choice of example, but
this is probably happening.
To me, even in concept design, if you can't draw a plan of it, it's not, and these things can't draw plans of anything. So it's not, I feel very strongly these things are not buildings. They're provocations and hallucinations.
Okay, I'm always having. I'll let Onur go before I start.
I want to know what Onur thinks.
Yeah, Onur, is it a building or is it a shoe?
I love the heated discussion. So I'm just gonna remind you Magritte's painting of the pipe, the smoke pipe, which is like that's not a pipe, right? So
yeah, right.
This is not a pipe, right? So I think that's what I'm hearing from Phil. So I think there's a plot twist here. I think it may become a building if you know enough about the buildings to know that it can't be. It's not the building. Okay, so if you have the expertise, if you have the background to know that it's not the building, it may lead to a building. That's my, it's just kind of like inspiration for imagery. So from that perspective, it's not a building. Just a quick example. I'm going to give two examples. One is about the images that are generated in Midjourney and Stable Diffusion. We saw a lot of them on LinkedIn. So I would say maybe 0.1% of the pictures that I saw would fit into that category because everybody did it thinking they are buildings, whereas they were not. Okay, so I don't think many people had the understanding of what a building is, which is a prototype on its own, right?
Yeah.
That's the other challenge. An image is not the building. And I'm going to jump to shoes from there. So it's interestingly, a building, the number of components, the complexities of the system is much higher than a shoe construction, right? And then actually with these kind of like diffusion models, now there are a lot of product designers, right? We started seeing like AI generated shoes, right? And none of them are shoes. So that's some food for thought, just understanding, how sophisticated to just make something, how hard it is, and how hard it is to make them work, right? So if you then if I go back and take your, question in the dumb way, yeah, it's not a building. So
And I was recently at some place, a vineyard somewhere in southern France, and there's some guy with more money than he knew what to do with. So instead of collecting art pieces, he collected architecture pieces. He hired architects to design a thing. Basically, whatever you want to do, design it. Come here, design a little something, and we'll build it. And I have a problem calling that architecture because to me, architecture is the solution to a problem, right? It's got a functionality to it, and maybe the form function thing is I'm too German for that. But everybody was like, "Oh my God, this is a great architecture." I'm like, "What's the use of this thing?" He built a shape that he liked and called it an art gallery. Is that architecture, right? Am I poking somebody's?
The technological tool analog to your comment, Andre, is my observation that every time a new technology comes along, as architects, our initial instinct is to make shapes and images with it, right? As opposed to solving other kinds of problems that one might argue we would be better served by solving. But you can go trace all the way back to pre-digital analog techniques like pin registered drafting through early CAD, BIM, Maya, 3D Studio Max. The immediate urge is to start making images or make shapes. And I'm not saying that's invalid. It just feels stunted to me that there are a whole series of really interesting problems that we face that need to be solved as architects. And my first instinct in using a powerful piece of technology is not to make a shape with it, but to solve some other problem that my client really cares about, like making it stand up or figuring out how to make it sustainable, or maybe keeping the slave created materials out of it.
yeah, I think.
Go ahead, Andre, sorry.
Yeah, I just want to add something to this. I kind of agree because the time that I've seen the explosion of the parametric age, right? Like 20 years ago. And then before that, there was the animation. Like, so everything would be animated, Maya, 3D Max, everything would be parametrically designed. Everything would be 3D printed, which is in the works still. Everything would be this, everything will be AI, right? So turns out it never happens, right? Like it's never everything. It's a portion of a thing that is, solving some problems, and only you can inject to kind of like very, I think, carefully picked portions of the processes of like designing and making. With that, actually, I like the question because if you ask this question as architecture, no architecture, oh, that would be a very long discussion, right? So that would go like forever. Going back to what Phil said about colors and shapes, because that's an open discussion. Yeah, but just thinking, when you say like building, no building, I like when we take it literal, it becomes the thing, and it's hard to kind of like think. Reduce it building to an image.
Can I chime in here? So I want to comment on what Phil said, but no, I think you're right. You talked in previous presentation you did about how softwares are just trends, right? And then really you got to get at the heart of what you're trying to do. And Phil, this happened to me where you talked about a new technology and trying to make an image and solve the crime. People came up to me and said, hey, can't we use this new AI technology, image generator, to create plans and elevations? And now we don't. I'm like, aren't we thinking about this backwards? Why are we trying to create plans and elevations? Like, shouldn't we be solving other problems with this? Like maybe doing something else with this technology?
I mean, not to mention the fact that an AI image generator has no idea what a plan or an elevation is, or what the relationship is between those two things.
Sure, that's the other problem. But the thought is, let's do plans and elevations, right? And I think that's what you're getting at, Phil. You want to try to. So I think looking ahead, trying to solve the problems that we have in the industry, not trying to look back. I think that's a good point, Phil.
I think I'd like to revise my answer to say, because of Midjourney, the image is definitely not a building, because the mindless reproduction of 1 million images of architecture depreciates the value to such a degree that it basically becomes the image no longer has like I come from, I went to school, I started in school in 2000 and I got out of school in 2008, which was a period of time for me when images dominated architecture. And I kind of feel like Midjourney might be the thing that finally kills that trend.
Huh. Well, actually expand on that, Pierce. And I asked that question as a colleague, not as a therapist. Expand on that a little bit.
Why I use the word kill instead of end it or something.
Yeah.
I mean, so 2001, I'm at Ohio State. Jeff Kipnis puts together this exhibition called Perfect Acts of Architecture. I still have the book on my shelf at home, and it's signed by Zaha Hadid, Peter Eisenman, everybody except Rem Koolhaas, all these kind of people in there, Bernard Schumi. And the funny thing about the Perfect Acts of Architecture book is it doesn't contain a single building that's built or that will be built. They're all, they're all these sort of like thought experiments and drawings, from these very conceptual architects. And that was high architecture at Ohio State. And then at the time when I started going to grad school, 2005 was the blobitecture phase of, I remember going to looking at Columbia's book, and it was all images of blobs, not a knock against it, but it wasn't sections and plans. It was beautiful renderings of blobs. And so I kind of feel, that image, maybe it was driven by competitions at the time, I'm not sure, but that image domination of the architecture that I saw in academia in my period, I kind of feel like now it's like, now that you can just push a button and make 50 of those, maybe the value goes out of them.
Yeah, you might be right. Maybe this will be the end of the image obsession, because it's so damn easy to generate images. Kind of compelling images, actually. But that's an interesting thesis.
Maybe it's also sorry, Andrea, go ahead. Yeah.
Maybe some architect will win a competition based on the resolution of a plan, of the functionality of a lobby, rather than the prettiest picture.
Right, but the analog to that is something we've been talking about here, at least amongst a few of my faculty colleagues, which is, we're in the business of training designers. How do you feel about conceptually about the idea that one of our students could do an entire project and never draw a line with anything, just prompt engineer her way through the whole project? I think I caused my colleagues here to freeze up conceptually when I suggested.
And it's good. It's resolved in this
No, nobody has any idea what's going to happen.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is, in your example, if the work is good that comes out of it, but it came out of none of the traditional tools of design that we think of.
Maybe, yeah, I don't know. I mean, we're getting to some really existential questions about what the importance of representational tools are to train designers and represent design. But, I suppose say I had a student that for whatever reason couldn't type or hold a pen, then maybe that would be okay. And maybe a less dramatic version of what we're talking about is a natural language Revit interface where you never had to wade through that complex UI. You just kind of said, I think I kind of want to, and the tool responded. I don't know. We're into a different set of topics here, but.
Yeah, I think like because you mentioned prompt engineering, I just want to kind of like take on that subject really quickly as well. So what we are not what the general population is not realizing is large language models, although they are large, they are still a dumbed down version of reality. They are restricted, right? So in a way, I don't see them like they're not too different than, let's say, visual programming interface like Grasshopper or Revit Dynamo, in which you have like pre-compiled components, so you can kind of like entangle them and then create something. So essentially, large language models or prompt engineering, again, is not a marvel. It has its own rules. It works in specific ways. It's just like a much, much larger than, like that kind of software. And of course, the external, the output is, again, let's say, depends on what you're kind of like putting there. So if you're using a specific tool, the prompt engineering there is different than the other one. So I'm going to make this analogy for architects here. Like when people started doing AutoGAD, which was a new tool at the time, which became a conventional tool, right, at the time. So at some time, and this is going to become a conventional tool in a sense. And some of the people were so excited to become prompt engineers too soon. And that reminded me of, I'm sorry to use this, but CAD monkeys, right? So these software users in which there are some rules you pull and push, but at the end of the day, you're not doing anything creative. You're not doing anything productive. Actually, you're kind of like repeating thing, kind of like pushing the buttons. So essentially, prompt engineers, I wrote something recently, which the entitled Prompt Engineers Unemployed, right? And I made that analogy because I said, okay, that's going to be the new generation of CAD monkeys, and so on. So this is just this, not to degrade, devalue the tool. It's amazing, but maybe it is to highlight that the steps we take towards creating value and meaning it has always been important, and it will be important, right? So we make images. To everybody's point, we can make 1,000, 2,000, 10,000 images per day for buildings, which makes life harder, actually. Now you have a much stronger filter, right, to pick the right one, to use the right one, or find the right ways to realize it in the best way possible, or the more valuable way possible. So I think the challenge remains the same, right? So it's always hard to create something meaningful, valuable, good for humanity, and so on and so forth. So the question is, how can we steer the story towards that, in my mind?
Well, and I think I do, it raises an issue for me. I feel like AI is kind of like a reverse of the Moravec's paradox, where the easy stuff is easy for it. Like, it's really good at writing a high school term paper. It's really good at doing a really like skimming sort of read of a document. And so, kind of just piggyback, what you're saying, Onur, like I wonder what happens when that entry level work gets removed. Like I'm not the only one who says it, but a lot of people are like, it's like a good intern. It can kind of start anything, but it can't finish anything. But what happens when people don't take those first steps? Because I think it's a very tech industry perspective on things, that the goal of work is just to get individual tasks done, and it's not about growth and development. And I kind of wonder,
if AI walks for us, will we ever learn to run, kind of a thing? I mean, and maybe not us, but like the next generations. What happens when my interns really are replaced by AI? How the heck do I have engineers after that? And how do I have engineer 2s and 3s when AI kind of cut out the bottom layer on all of that?
Well, it's an interesting question, Pierce, because my generation of architects, I'm fond of recounting that, when I started out as a puppy architect, I was detailing toilet partitions, right? Then they let me do a whole toilet, right? Then after that, I got to do 2 toilets instead of just 1 toilet, and then I got to do the entire building core. And when a bot can do all that for me, what is my entry point? And not just technically, like, okay, so maybe I don't have to know how to detail a toilet partition ever again. Thank you, Jesus, that's great. But what are the entry points to the profession, or to any kind of professional discipline? Where do you get in? It's kind of like, AI is the procedural analog of working from home. How do you learn about being an architect sitting on your couch? I'm not sure you can.
I had this discussion with somebody, and I can't remember who it is. I really want to credit the right person with this, but their response to that comment, or version of that comment for me, was entry level will be learning something new. AI will be the tool you'll learn now. And you'll learn to be a better AI editor, and that will be what the entry level job is. Which I don't know that I don't know. I don't know that it's hard for me to kind of picture what that looks like, just because that's definitely not how my career my first job was drawing intake vents on a reflected ceiling plan, and not even knowing what they were, just being like, put an X in this corner and a slash in that corner, and I had no idea what I was doing. I just knew every room needed to have two.
What tool were you using, Pierce, while doing those drawings?
I was MicroStation back then. For whatever reason, I was a MicroStation place.
Which is different than what other people were using 50 years before you. So I think that's the point. So from that perspective, I think, it's going to be, AI will be embedded into these tools, right? So now it's emerging as like Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, this and that, but it's going to kind of like trickle down. For instance, Photoshop already has a bit of that, right? So I think it's going to become a part of CAD. I think that one problem we're having constantly is, CAD is going to be replaced by AI. Not really, right? So it's going to kind of infuse into CAD, and CAD is going to transform, and the kids are going to learn that. So that's my take.
Yeah, I mean, you might see an AI helping you represent something. I'm getting to the point where like, okay, I need a toilet, right? Somebody draw me a toilet, but deciding when you need a toilet drawn or something more complicated, having the AI act autonomously in context to direct that we need to generate X, Y, or Z, I think we're a long way off from that.
Yeah, and I think we addressed that in the next survey question, right? Whether it's going to replace your job. That's where we're going to go. Yeah, but I want to comment too. In our office, we've started to do research around AI and using it as an automation tool, not as a replacement for what we're going to say engineering judgment.
Mm-hmm.
We have to train engineers. We weren't worried about when the calculator came out. We weren't worried about when structural analysis programs came out. We're not worried about AI coming out. It's just a matter of having, like you said, Phil, the right entry points where you can do the training, and police it in that way. Next topic's really exciting. What?
I was going to say, just on the structural engineering side, I've heard that a few times of senior engineers complaining that when people get used to structural analysis tools, they lose track of how to do, like, what they're really analyzing, like what the point loads mean versus whatever else, because they're just letting the software. I'm sure you've kind of heard that criticism before.
Yeah, but didn't we hear that same argument when calculators came to be?
I was just going to say, who has
I don't
heard
know.
their math teacher say, you need to learn 15 by 17 because you will never have a calculator in your pocket all the time. Well, guess what? We all do.
It's an ongoing issue, Pierce, no matter what technology you're using, because technology wraps our whole industry. Just have to manage it correctly and make sure that training is number one. Okay. I'm interested. Let's get this next topic. That's gonna be fun. What do we got, Andre, with the adults?
Sorry, I'm having a little chocolate snack. Pierce just started our next topic there, and then you guys veered away from it again. But I took it as the prompt for our next question here.
Let's do it.
Who's worried about losing their jobs, and how long do you think it's gonna take until that moment is there?
Yeah.
So our polling says, what are we saying here? Everybody is really arrogant about it. Only 10% are worried.
Yeah, that's great to see actually, and I kind of trust in that. I really trust in that. And one is like, okay, calculator was a man. Actually, calculator name is not for the digital device to begin with. It was a person, right? So it was a job. You were a calculator in an office, like whatever, however many years ago, and that job was replaced by calculators. So, which is to say that calculator is doing a very finite job, very stupid, dumb job of, like doing operations using numbers, and there's only one single answer to that question. So on the other side, humans, our life is ambiguous. There is never one single answer. You don't know what's going to happen at the end of the discussion. We don't know what's going to happen, once the discussion's over tomorrow, and so on and so forth. So I think one interesting thing is that, again, AI is promising, or people are thinking that, it is going to find, find the answers, give the answers for us for this and that. Whereas actually it's going to be like a calculator. It's going to give definitive answer, limited answer within a given predefined problem area, right? So from that perspective, I love the confidence of people. And there was a question which is really good in the chat, which was how do you deal with the issue of AI being confidently wrong? I love that. And exactly like this, vote for I'm not going to lose my job, right? So that's being confident against AI, or kind of like fixing AI, which is being the critical user, evaluator, and developer of AI, right? So I think that's super important. Just trying to understand that these tools can be used or developed towards, again, with the awareness of their potential in calculating and solving non-ambiguous problems, and then let humans deal with ambiguity. So that's my brief answer for this one. I'm going to come back to ambiguity, which is a long discussion, but want to stop here.
Okay. Do I chime in next, or Phil or Pierce, you want to go?
I could jump in.
Okay, go ahead. Go first.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm the person here who's meant to kind of represent boring office work for AI, or AI for boring office work. Like, because I'm not here to kind of talk too much about computational design. There are people in my group who do that and are much better at it. But I think the thing I want to kind of start off with is that the automation of work, it's always this bi-directional kind of relationship. Like you have like industrialization kind of made the assembly line make more sense. The assembly line made additional automations make more sense. We changed the work for the tech, and the tech changes for the work. There's kind of it's an opportunism that comes from both directions. Now, once again, I'm kind of coming to this from more of an office work standpoint, and so I look at the sort of this digitalization, digital transformation that we've all been pushing for the last 20 years. Has set us up to where AI really can begin to kind of sneak into all of our apps and everything else. And I don't mean to make that sound sinister. I mean, I don't think AI is going to take my job. I actively am trying to be the guy who knows AI who takes my job from me from last year, basically. Like I am actively systematizing, automating my job, and AI has helped me do that. It's made me a power user in Google Apps Script, Power BI. I'm integrating things and doing projects within my kind of within the office work and the data tracking that I do that I didn't even know how to start a year ago. So there's about like half of my job is this work of kind of building, maintaining, and running data systems, and then getting others to within my team and in other departments to kind of participate in those data systems. And so in an ideal world, that does get automated. That chunk of my job goes away. I always kind of picture something like Stack Overflow that's basically this like automated, self-organized, distributed, gamified platform that people interact with rather than me kind of, pulling all the strings behind the scenes. So that part, I kind of hope that does go away. I hope AI takes that job from me. The other part is people oriented. And I don't think, and I guess what I mean by that is like recruiting, managing, coaching, people development, business development. I think you could, in a world, kind of have AI do those things, but you would lose, as long as human beings still make up organizations, you'd lose company culture. And additionally, I think kind of back to that thing I had said earlier about the images, like at the point where those things become uh like I don't know, like let's say like in terms of kind of people development, let's say somebody on my staff went to get career advice from the chatbot, and even if the chatbot gives really good career advice, that's no longer a differentiator between my organization and somebody else's organization. Like it's replaced the human to human connection with something transactional. So I think that part needs to be there as long as people, as long as it's still a people business.
Okay, I'll go next. I said I'm not worried about AI taking my job. I mentioned a little while ago that one thing I I embrace about AI is the ability to automate. If I'm talking about personally, half my job is I have to automate things, whether it's building scripts or whatever. I think AI now and then in the near future is going to really help with that. I encourage AI to help me in that area, definitely. I think so that's what I really like about AI. I also don't think it's going to take my job because another part of what I do is I'm always looking on the bleeding edge of what's the latest research and technology, and AI is only as smart as what it can search up on the internet, and what is zeros and ones, and what big data databases it can search through. So when I look at AI, I see a huge opportunity for areas that are not explored. And so what a lot of things that I'll do with technology is I'll look and see what ChatGPT doesn't know about. And those are areas for me to blaze my own trail, to make my own efforts to help the industry in those areas. And then that goes back to some of the things. There was a question about like, what do you do when it's confidently wrong? Because AI will make an attempt to say, yeah, I know the answer and here it is. And what we've done in our office is we come up with this system called trust but verify. And so if we're using AI, we tend to have like subject champions that will vet certain areas. Like if you're looking into, I don't know, how to do Visual Basic and you're asking ChatGPT, there's a Visual Basic expert who could then vet the answers. But what we found is that some of those individuals that we task with those vettings actually end up becoming the human ChatGPTs, and you kind of just go to them for those kind of answers, and they'll look up ChatGPT, or they'll kind of get they'll kind of be the experts in the office. So we found a lot of positives there, and then it's also another part of our job in the engineering industries. We got to solve problems, and we don't see AI solving that. We got to go out to a site because a beam is leaning down. ChatGPT is not going to be able to say, "Okay, jack it up, put on weld plates, and call up the mill factory and find out what sizes are available." That's not going to happen. You've seen that, Pierce, right? You've seen that sign on the side of that construction gate that said ChatGPT finished constructing this building, right? So, there's a lot of things that it can't do, but I think automation is something that that we embrace. And then, of course, the limits that it only knows what's out there is also extremely insightful too.
Can I jump in here?
Yeah.
Marcel, I'm just gonna pick on the words you use. When you
Okay.
said that's okay. No, no. This is because of how we talk about it. I love this.
Okay.
Your last sentence of saying like it knows what's out there. So, and this is another side of the debate. I think like the human, the way we know things, we don't actually know how we know things. Like how we have models of the brain and cognition and perception, but there's no holistic description of how everything about us work. How we know things is a mystery. Like we don't know it.
Yeah.
And interestingly, like on the AI side, what's happening is only we can quantify specific qualities of life, which can be converted into numbers, to text, and so on and so forth, which is already reduced from the knowledge, the experience of life, the perception of life, and so on and so forth. And then, we create this pattern and feed into the, automatic system, which kind of like, rehashes them, kind of like finds the recurring pattern and gives that back to you, which is again like this, quantified quality. And then we have an understanding of that. We read it back, right? So in my mind, it's a pretty interesting, and this is not the kind of like, this is how I'm thinking about. There's a huge funnel of things. You kind of like compress it. There's a machine that does something, and you get it back into the funnel of life again, and try to evaluate it. And I kind of like, so that's the one. When I slow down and think about it that way, this is the answer coming. Like, as I am, AI it cannot take my job. Even if I'm hammering something, it's not going to be my job of hammering something. It's going to be hammering something maybe in its own way. You know what I mean? It's going to get my salary too. Okay, if they were afraid of that, right? But essentially, it's not my way of hammering the thing. It's really definitely not the same thing. And then here comes I think there's a big opportunity here, to Pierce's point too. If it is taking that kind of like hours of hammering from my life, I can go and run out, in the fields and look, do cloud gazing, right? So the question is how what are we going to do with this stuff? How are we going to design life using these AI tools?
Yeah. So Pierce, now
Yeah,
that
good
you
points.
have all this extra time, you have all this extra time because you become a Power BI AI Zen guru. You're working 25 hours a week instead of 60. What are you doing with all that extra time?
Well, I don't have it yet. I'm still building the systems.
But speculate, because I think this is an important question.
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, for one, I'm like a huge cynic when it comes to like UBI or any of these other things. Like, this is part of being an American, I guess, is like I just don't think the system's going to take care of any of us. Just because it just hasn't. I haven't seen it do much of that in my own lifetime. So I kind of feel like if we do get to like a 4-hour work week, we'll just get paid for 4 hour, or sorry, 4-day work week. We'll just get paid for 4 days. This is my own kind of cynicism. This is my Gen Z, my Gen X cynicism.
Right. But, so I think this raises this really interesting question, right? On the one hand, it seems like these technologies come along and they have the potential to make us more productive, right? We can do the same work in less time. And at least speaking from as an architect, you could see a wide range of production related activities, largely in the latter stages of design and during the transactional parts of construction, that are pretty rote and could be automated with algorithms that can act autonomously. Making door schedules, recording meeting minutes, counting this, or generating this specification. There's probably a big swath of that stuff that would, in theory, reduce the number of people it takes to produce an architectural project. That would be the theory. But, you know, the reality is, however, somehow the problems that we're working on expand to fill the space created by the technological productivity. And nobody's exactly sure why that's the case. If you're really interested in this question, you should read this paper by Austin Goolsbee, who's a professor, economics professor at the University of Chicago, and also the chairman of the Chicago Federal Reserve. He wrote this really interesting working paper called The Strange and Awful Path of Productivity in the US Construction Sector. And basically what he was saying was construction productivity, we measured construction productivity 7 different ways to Sunday, and it is unquestionable that construction productivity in the United States stinks. It has not accelerated at all. However, we're a bunch of fancy pants Chicago economists, and we have no idea why this is the case. We cannot figure it out. And so we don't, and it's even worse, I think, on the design side, because we don't even have measures of productivity on the design side. At least in construction, we can convert GDP to hours worked, but on the design side, it's very, very difficult. But somehow we get CAD, we get BIM, we get Excel, we get AI, and we're not working any fewer hours. Something always expands to fill the space. And
You know, there was a, oh, sorry, go ahead, Phil.
no, but we're not going to be able to decide whether these technologies are going to start replacing people's jobs until we figure out what it means to actually be productive. Because somehow the building enterprise, the complexity of the building enterprise exceeds our ability to manage it. I mean, it reminds me of when we were in the early days of Revit. No matter how much we put into the product, our most advanced customers were always way out ahead of us in terms of functionality demands. They were always trying to do things that were beyond the scope of the software, no matter how fast we worked. So I don't know. I mean, I think these are interesting questions.
Yeah, I was just going to say there was a article in Wired a few weeks ago. If anybody, I think I posted on LinkedIn, but in that article they quoted another report that I can't remember who had it, but they're basically saying like there's evidence that as technology kind of goes to solve our, you know, to solve our problems, it complexifies. Like the more technology we add to the problem actually makes the new problems more complex than the previous problems, so that it's an ever expanding complexity. You're just creating layers and layers of complexity. And maybe, Phil, back to your question to me, like, what am I doing with all my extra time? It might be building increasing layers of complexity, of building like 1,000,001 little automations that do all this data takeoff.
Yeah, it should keep yourself busy. Yeah. I mean, you know, Ron Allen posted this question about what if we kept our time more accurately? That's just an input. If you can measure the inputs more accurately, but you've got to find some way of measuring the outputs. I'm in a years long and slow conversation with Kermit Baker from the AIA. He's the chief economist of the AIA about this question. How do you measure architectural productivity? And he doesn't have a good answer. And apparently neither does Austin Goolsbee.
So just the news from China. I can't share the link, but you can Google China is demolishing skyscrapers, unfinished buildings. So this is your efficiency. Actually, there are literally lots of skyscrapers are being demolished to keep the economy moving and keep the home, like the apartment prices, stable at value. All right. So because they overbuilt, but at the same time, Phil, they keep building. So that, I mean, they're not only demolishing, they keep building too. So it's in the news. Just Google it. I saw it today. It's madness. So far they demolished, the square footage is equivalent to all housing in the UK. That's what they demolished before construction was done in China. Okay. So here is your efficiency. Here is what you're doing with that extra time from one mindset, right? Yeah. No.
But it's not a market economy, Hunter. I mean, it's a command and control economy.
exactly.
They're demolishing buildings to keep their real estate sector afloat so their economy doesn't collapse. And,
Yeah.
and they're not doing a very good job of it, frankly.
Yeah. So I think it's an example again, like regardless of I think the place and the action, I think it's an example of like how not to use that efficiency and free time, you're referring to. I would rather, Pierce, so utopia, right? I would rather reduce your working hours by using AI to 4 hours, right? Pay you for the 4 hours, which would be enough to sustain the same life you have. You know what I mean? So it's like the economy of things are done in a way, I think, in my mind, the system is built in a way to suck that efficiency from you and use it for profit elsewhere.
Correct.
Which is not your life. Right. So that's the sad part of the story.
Yeah, but you know what? I'm teaching this course in forced labor in the building industry, and eventually, sooner or later, every semester, the students get to the same conclusion. The only answer to the problem is to destroy global capitalism. And it's like, guys, okay, we'll just stipulate that's an answer. Can we move on? Because that's not happening this week. Global capitalism is going to be here to stay. All right, Andre, what's next? Oh, so we're going to move on to this data question. Come on, people, we need more answers than 8.
Andre, I think you're muted.
Yes, I am. Sorry about that. So yeah, we're going back to data. Right, garbage in, garbage out. There's quazillions of photos on Instagram that Midjourney can learn from, but only so many buildings in the world.
Well, I think the question here.
We're balancing better here.
Yeah, it's interesting. The question here stems from the basic issue that it's going to take a ton of data to train AIs to do anything interesting in the built environment. Where does all that data come from? Nobody has it, and it's not freely available. It's not like ingesting all the sentences on the internet. So if it's going to happen, it's going to have to happen collectively, which means the industry is going to have to do something really differently than it's done before. I wrote a chapter about this in my AI book, and I wonder where all that data is going to come from. I mean, unless somebody creates an AI that you can train on 6 Revit models, which I think is highly unlikely, we're gonna need some kind of data strategy for the industry, which means you got to give up your data. Are you willing to do it or not? And we got the 33 people of the 59 who are online are neck and neck here about whether they would or would not give up their data. Very interesting.
Can I stir the pot? And also, this is a question for all the panelists here. I am somewhat out of architecture, so I want to ask this to you. So that data is going to come from the built environments we have, right? Assuming, I mean, wherever, anywhere in the world. How successful has humanity been with the built environments till today? Are you happy like with the built environment, all buildings, whatever, in Barcelona, in New York, in Guatemala, because that's the other thing, right?
Well,
so AI is going to suck all that data and find the statistical. Yeah, I'm going to get back to it, but yeah, that's the question.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess it depends on whether you're trying to ingest the global intergalactic knowledge base of all things ever built, whether I'd just like to see enough handicapped toilets that I never had to detail another handicapped toilet, right? It's really a question of the scope and breadth. And what we know from our friends who are data scientists on the AI side, at least this is what my friends tell me, is half the work of training an AI is collecting the data, and the other half of the work is curating it so it's cleaned up in some form that it's actually useful. So you're gonna have to figure out how to make a Guatemalan door taxonomically similar to an Italian door so it's actually useful as training data. So that's why the question was framed the way it was. Assuming we can detach you from the data and we can curate it, would you hand it over in exchange for having access to it? And it's a dead heat of the 36 people who voted.
So
people being about slightly more than half of the people online.
So I think part of the question for me is that the data isn't it's not my data to share. It's my client's data.
No, it isn't. Your instruments and service are yours to share.
Well, I'm generally a subcontractor now in my current role. But additionally, I'll mention this. I mean, most of my clients are public agencies. What's that?
Right, but your clients have the right to use your data. They don't own your data.
But I guess like if we're talking about the building model, the plans, the drawings and things like that. I mean, like and this isn't to single anybody out, but like a port authority, BIM agreement says they own all inventions, ideas, whatever. They have that kind of standard language that's in everybody's BIM guideline. Once again, not to single anybody out, that language is everywhere. I think Microdesk might have been the original ones to come up with that. But so I talked to a couple of most of my clients are public public agencies, like public organizations, like all the city and kind of states, the Port Authority, Massport, folks like that. And I talked to a few of them over the last couple of weeks in preparation for this question, and none of them said no, but they had a lot of questions. And I think the biggest one was who runs the data trust?
Yeah, right. That's the big question.
And I was like, I don't know, who would you trust? Building Smart? And they're like, no. There's nothing against Building Smart, but they were like, I was like, okay, the AGC. And they're like, no.
Right now, there's an implicit data trust being run by Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Amazon, OpenAI. They're just taking the data and keeping it. I mean, in theory, one could create in a kind of NGO-like structure a third-party nonprofit entity that would take the data and anonymize it. And I guess Ron's question, is it Ron's question? I guess it's David Brownell's question. You would not have access to the data. You would have access to the AI's use of the data. There's a difference. You don't have access to the training data. You have access to the results of the training data. So you can't go look at the 73 handicap toilets that I designed, but you get to use the AI. You get to use the AI that can design the toilets. That's the theory, at least.
Yeah, that's a good one, and I think that clarification is pretty important because data is a portion of the thing, right? So like we can't actually everybody can say yes to this question and then give the data, and depending on who is building the AI system and what the AI system is doing, can change everything. You can get black or white, really, like literally that different. So my concern is more about this statistical significance, which is, for AI to find these patterns and extract them and use them, they have to reappear, right? So it's essentially looking into these like reoccurring events like pixels or, like the word change, what word follows what word, and so on. That's how large language systems work. So interestingly, there was an article recently which is about like there's nothing significant about statistically significant thing, right? So you're kind of like, it's a bell curve. You're getting the bigger chunk of the thing, but if it is hollow inside, if it is the, like, say, replication or recurrence of the bad toilet design, like fails, question, then actually you are doing worse instead of doing better. So.
Well, I think I mean, maybe this is the contractor me coming out again. Like, I definitely want to find out what the benchmarks are for RFIs. Like, I'm thinking about this less about kind of getting the best bathroom and more just like, I want benchmarks that tell me what the normal amount of RFIs are for a healthcare facility of a certain square
Yeah,
footage in the Northeast.
It's all that kind of stuff, right? I mean, when my former colleagues at Autodesk built their first, I can't remember what they called it, but it was they got 6 big contractors on the West Coast to pool all of their like Procore data in one big data lake. And they started analyzing that data, and they found some really interesting correlations between the surprising presence of references to water. Like, there's water on this standing on the slab. There's water leaking here. The relative humidity level in the enclosed building is high, and change orders. They found these really interesting data correlations that didn't exist. But that required 6 major contractors to take all of their stuff, good, bad, and ugly, and put it in a giant data lake so it could be evaluated. Now imagine if all the US contractors did that, and all the US designers took all their Revit models and all their AutoCAD drawings, and we used our third-party data trust and kept it private, so you couldn't access it. It wasn't discoverable, and maybe built some AIs that would normalize the data, so you could at least find all the doors and find all the walls and find all the roofs. And then you threw all that stuff in a big data lake and you could start processing it. And anybody who contributed had access to the results. It's kind of like if they test the vaccine on me and it works, I'm protected early. Like one of my staff members here was an early tester of COVID vaccines. She was one happy camper through the whole pandemic. So that would have to be the theory. Of course, I will say for the record that would require a degree of structural cooperation, the likes of which the AEC industry has never, ever seen, ever, right? Like, we can't even agree on what we're gonna trying to agree on, much less agree on it. So it would require heavy medication and cases of alcohol to make this happen.
Aren't they doing, isn't that
Andre.
what they do Burning Man for?
Yeah, we need the Burning Man of AEC to do this.
Andre, is this our last question?
Formally, yes. From here
Okay.
on out, it's
Can I
open
make
to the room.
Okay, I'll make a point on sharing data that's related. And I was thinking about it when we were all talking. There is one data that we could share that is not proprietary, and that's the conversations we have with the chatbots. And I mean, I'm trying to say is there's not a lot of transparency on where that information goes when we have a conversation with the chatbot. But I've had conversations with people who are literally worried about the future, like AI is going to take over the human race and we're going to be enslaved by AI, and there's going to be AI murder bots and that sort of thing. And it got me thinking right now that one thing we could do, and I do this myself, is we play a little role when we have those conversations and add the extra effort to be extremely civil and professional with the AI chatbot. So what I do is when I use the chatbot and it helps me with something, I always end it. I don't cut it off. I always end it with like, wow, thank you so much. That was extremely helpful. And then it'll say, yeah, well, if you want to know more, come back. And I'd be like, yeah, that's so great. You're so helpful. And it's like, okay, well, that's my job. It's these kind of little things that's learning from us that we could just interject with that. We don't really need it. Well, we don't need an excuse to be nice to anything, but it's something that I do that makes me feel a little more confident that we train these AIs, and we could do our part now to have it
When the murder
be
bots
nice
take
to us in the
over,
future.
you're the last one to get shot. I
Yeah,
get it.
so
I'm going to be the
hedging your
last one.
bets.
right, when the murder bot comes to get you, Marcel, it's just gonna say, please.
Be like,
right?
hey, remember, I
I-
was the one who said thank you. Don't get
Yeah,
me.
but you still
I
have-
have heard that there is some evidence that you get better results from ChatGPT when you're polite, as opposed to when you become combative with it. It begins to mirror your tone.
Well, there you go. I mean,
Well,
there you
it's
go.
like Siri. If you get frustrated with Siri and you swear at it, it will apologize to you. And if you,
Yeah,
Oh no.
you get frustrated with Siri, you go, F you, Siri, the Siri will go, I'm just trying to help.
So my kind of final word is, I think this AI is going to take over our jobs, take over the human race. I think it comes from this kind of paranoid way of thinking, and I like to think of it in a very different way, which is like a pronoia way of thinking. Like, we have this belief that AI is really trying to help us, and everyone in the industry is trying to help us, and that's kind of the way I look at this. And so, it could help others as well.
But I guess one question for you guys along those lines that's a little orthogonal to your comment is, so we know that these big providers right now are pouring huge amounts of money into these technologies. And let's set aside for a moment the questions about monopolies and so forth. But don't you think there's going to become a point where having gotten us to rely on these things, they're going to put up these huge paywalls? It's kind of like every time Hulu raises my monthly subscription, it really pisses me off. Don't you think that's coming?
Yeah, what I think is, I have a tangential answer to that. I think this technology is going to, unfortunately, support the unequal wealth distribution. It's going to accelerate it, and polarization, because if you look into human history, that's the recurring theme, and this is going to give a lot of power to a little number of people. So I don't know if it's going to be through Hulu, subscription and so on, or specific products, but I think it's on its way.
Well, Richard Susskind essentially wrote the same thing 2 years ago in his latest book, where he basically argues that the outsourcing of industrialization and the automation of manufacturing has already gutted the middle class in the United States, and that these technologies are going to make that even worse. That the rich are going to continue to get richer, and the middle class will continue to get hollowed out. It's like a lot of these, the Luddites are getting a lot of play these days in podcasts.
Finally,
right?
I was waiting for it.
So, the Luddites were not against technology per se. They had two problems with the English looms. The product output was shitty, and they were losing their jobs with no other replacement, right? So they weren't just smashing the machines because they didn't like the idea of technology. They didn't like they said, we can do a better job and you're taking our jobs away. And there's a template there, I think a really interesting template.
I mean, I think you're seeing it play out this summer. I mean, it is kind of the strikes continue to happen. They've been relatively successful. And they're AI related. I mean, I know that's not a thing we're going to get into on this one, but at least we have like 3 strikes happening right now, and then there was the actors and writers guild strikes before that, and AI is mentioned in half of those.
My brother-in-law is in the film industry. The interesting thing about the writers' strike is the writers won on their AI demands, and the studios are all pissed, and they just cut the amount of shows that they're producing. So the entire industry is right now kind of not happy because less work to go around. So yeah, there's which goes through, you can compare the writers here to the Luddites, right, and Netflix to the Loom.
Well, and I think that's where I think
the bigger lever to be pulled.
Like the writer's strike was trying to set rules around the technology. The auto workers strike was trying to set rules around the labor, in terms of extending, increasing pay, reducing hours and things like that, rather than trying to kind of push back against the technology. And to me, that feels like a smarter solution because you're focusing more. I mean, I don't know. I hate to turn this whole thing into like a labor discussion, but there's a model there.
And Susskind is a hyper AI optimist, at least in terms of the technology. What Susskind argues is that ultimately these autonomous algorithms, when they can do human knowledge work, we're going to run out of things for humans to do, which is going to call some pretty basic questions. Maybe that's a topic that's beyond the scope of conversation for the Revit users group, but it is an interesting argument.
I mean, we touched on that when we were like sorting through questions that might want to be asked here today, and Luddites, universal basic income. There's a limit to what we can do here in a users group and what we want to do.
Right, but so I'll frame this question to get back to our ethical dilemmas and artificial intelligence topic in a slightly different way. I watched a really interesting argument between two of my faculty colleagues last week in our faculty meeting, that were diagonally opposite and equally valid, and it was super interesting. We were talking about how the schools should be addressing and embracing AI as an opportunity, an educational opportunity. One faculty member said, this thing's coming, it's inevitable, it's a really interesting tool, it's got a lot of potential, we should embrace it, we should lead, we should figure it out, we should be in the forefront of the use of this technology. That was a design faculty member, and I'll bet you could guess who it was, Pierce. The other faculty member, who was a history theory professor, said, these things are giant plagiarism machines. They ingest human knowledge. They don't attribute it. They violate basic tenets of scholarly work, which is we read the work of others, we appropriate it, but we attribute it. And they're dangerous intellectual disaster areas, and we should have nothing to do with them. But both points were equally valid, because it is true. One thing that these AIs are really shitty at is generating footnotes, right? Or attributions. In fact, they make them up. They actually invent them, right? They invent sources. They invent when you ask them to do attribution, because they're not capable of it. So either they're the next big thing, or they're giant ingesters of humanity's intellectual property and paying nothing for it, and providing no attribution, which I think is pretty interesting.
Will you be on?
Muted me. Did I unmute? Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, but we could hear you, but not Pierce. Pierce kind of died.
Oh,
Pierce, yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, I was just asking. So, Phil, at the end of that conversation, will you be offering an AI course?
We're already offering AI courses, and we intend to offer more. And we're actually in the forefront as a school here at Yale with AI research and AI experimentation. Not like the comp sci department, but we're building our own stuff. We're experimenting with things. We're making tools available for the students. I mean, guys, the horse has already left the barn here. The only way we're going to be able to get it back in the barn is to shoot it, and I don't think that's going to happen.
Maybe this is. I think I love the example of ChatGPT kind of like creating these fake references and citations for papers or research, whatever you're trying to do. interestingly, you can push them to, hey, stop telling me the, the non-existent things, just kind of like talk about the, existing, let's say, research, and actually it can go back and fix itself. But again, I think the one problem is now all the tools that we are seeing now are very generalist babies. So they're babies. They don't understand anything. They don't know anything, and they are super generalists. Like they're trying to, come chat with me. I can tell you how to fix your bike, but also I can write about the whatever sad circuit architecture from 1300s, and then this and that, right? So that is a problem, and that's why, for instance, Grammarly, I mean, didn't advertise AI and so on and so forth, but it's using kind of a similar technology. So there's so many other tools which that had been kind of like implementing these things, and I think it's going to get like better and more understandable and more usable. The horses before, I mean, hopefully before we shoot them, right? So, and they're going to come like become smaller horses, come back to the barn and attach themselves to the right tool, right? So I kind of like see these LLM tools to become, part of Microsoft Word, wherein like you are in charge. If you read it, you know it. If you're learning from, AI, well, that's another way to learn from it, and so on and so forth. So when these generalist babies as AI tools are more refined, as let's say Photoshop is using, diffusion models now in the background, I think things will start to make more sense. And I totally understand our resistance. I included myself. I became super critical with any image tool when they kind of started popping, because again, like they do almost everything with like they're nonsensical almost. So it was like, it didn't make sense. But again, hopefully they're going to become more meaningful and logical parts of the tool sets we have.
Yeah, I continue to believe that you cannot form a generally useful model of the world with statistics. The world is not a statistical phenomenon. The world is a causal phenomenon. And I've gotten very interested recently in this idea of semantic validity, which is a rule of logic that says all the precedent conditions have to validate in all combinations for conclusion to be correct. And right now what we have are, these systems have zero semantic validity. I can use the same set of inputs for an image generator 10 times in a row and get 10 different answers. And so you're right, they're hallucinogenic generalist babies. And until we can reduce the degree of hallucination, they're not going to be wildly useful. So I think you're right. I think little tiny baby horses in the barn that do very specific things that are not, whose danger can be controlled is likely the best answer. But getting to generalized artificial intelligence, it's just not going to happen, which means our robot overload, at least not with the current models that we're using, these correlation models that we use.
Yeah, this is it's a great point. To be honest, so again, one policy is Phil, what you're saying about AGI is referring to intelligence. Artificial intelligence is not human intelligence, and thus it's called artificial intelligence, right? So people think AGI will be general artificial intelligence will be like a human-like intelligence, but again, it's just going to be doing the pattern work. So essentially, if you think like, we are operating on fully patterns, yes, maybe they will resemble it, but otherwise, I'm on the same page with you about artificial general intelligence.
Yeah, Gary Marcus just wrote this kind of scathing critique of Jeff Hinton's 60 Minutes interview from last weekend. And he one of the examples he used was that the chatbot thought that 2 pounds of feathers weighed less than 1 pound of lead. And so some human curator probably went back and fixed that. The problem is the chatbot doesn't understand anything about weight, feathers, or lead. So are we gonna train these things by correcting every possible mistake they can make. It just doesn't, it makes no sense to me.
We already do.
Well-
I mean, there's another great Wired article about the industry of AI trainers and these, this whole other network of people getting, paid to basically just be like, click on answers like that with thumbs ups and thumbs down to make sure these things work.
And really, but we're going to build cognitive coherence by doing that. I don't believe it. I just don't buy it. I don't think we'll ever. I think I'm all in favor of tiny horses. I am not in favor of giant horses.
Yeah,
I think that's the title of your next book.
Yeah, I love that. Tiny horses. I like that. Yeah, it's a human in the loop.
Don't forget to credit owner for that then in a little footnote.
No, it's fine. Yeah, exactly. Little footnote.
In a little footnote.
My book's
And I
going to
think-
be called Don't Shoot Tiny Horses.
And I think, Phil, like, this is what scares companies, like with the company I work for and a lot of people I talk with, they ban the use of AI bots like Chat GPT and Stable Diffusion, et cetera, because they're just not quite sure what place it has in the company. And I've had people upset about the fact that that's the case. And I said, well, it's still in its infancy. There's these little horses that you got to rein in. But I kind of made the analysis like when I started working, the internet, like you didn't have internet at your desk. You had to go to a station on the other side of the office because everyone was worried and paranoid that people would be using the internet on their computer. So I think this is just kind of in its infancy, but it'll evolve, like when I was saying, so that it'll kind of work its way into places in the company that people trust. But I think it's going to be these little stables, like you said.
Little stalls, not giant.
Little stalls. Yeah.
Yeah.
There'll actually be a stall on the other side of the office that's monitored, right?
All right. I like to close on the little horses.
Okay.
That sounds like
Andrew, I want to make a quick kind of like request before you close. I think we should, everybody mentioned some resources. And if it is ever possible, it would be nice to share them either quickly on the chat here or maybe as a follow-up, some articles, books, and news and published discussions. That would be pretty amazing. Yeah, I just want to ask for that. Thank you.
when in doubt, dump it into the discussion on Meetup.
Okay.
Right, I can if you don't have the time or can find it right now to put it in the chat here. There's always the Meetup group that's open. You can keep making comments to this event on Meetup. Those all will run up with me, and then I can spread that around. Also, if you want to be in on the spreading around, leave a little note there. Other than that, I love closing on the little tiny baby horses in the cute little stables. That's just a beautiful image that I'm gonna take home and have some dinner. Thank you guys. Thank you so much. I know it's been a while and it's been a little bit of a drag to make this happen between all the schedules. I think this was a really interesting and important discussion to have. Phil and Pierce, just so you know, I have proposed this to the AAA National Convention next year, and I put the 2 on you on the name there. No idea where it's gonna go. Let's have a look.
It won't go anywhere. Don't worry, it won't go anywhere.
Anyway, thank you everybody else. We're currently working on probably the week after Thanksgiving. Probably something on scanning. You should be seeing that the next week or two on Meetup. Other than that, what is the next holiday? Halloween, right? Have a great Halloween, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. See you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Take care, everyone. Good to
Good
see
night.
you. Bye-bye.